The restaurant was the kind where silence had a price tag, where crystal glasses whispered against linen tablecloths and every guest believed they were important, simply because they could afford to be there. And in the center of it all sat Victor Langford, a self-made billionaire whose name alone opened doors and closed mouths, a man who believed money was proof of intelligence and poverty was evidence of failure. And when Aliyah stepped up to his table that night wearing a simple black uniform, her hair tied neatly back, her posture calm and professional, he barely looked at her, snapping his fingers instead like she was invisible until she spoke, her voice polite, warm, asking if he was ready to order. And that was when he finally looked up, his eyes scanning her skin, her accent, her calm confidence, and a smirk formed on his lips as he leaned back and said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear, "Are you sure you're smart enough to serve me? I don't want my dinner ruined by someone who can't even spell the menu." And the laughter that followed wasn't joyful. It was nervous, uncomfortable, forced, and the room froze. Every waiter pretending not to hear, every guest suddenly fascinated by their plates, and Aliyah stood there holding her notepad, her hands steady, her face unreadable. Because this wasn't the first time someone had underestimated her, but it was the first time someone had done it so publicly, so cruelly, and Victor, mistaking her silence for submission, waved her away dismissively and said, "Get someone else. Someone competent." And in that moment, something shifted, not in the room, but inside Aliyah. And if you've ever been judged before being known, dismissed before being heard, then stay with this story and make sure you subscribe, because what she did next turned humiliation into history. Aliyah didn't cry, didn't argue, didn't storm off like Victor expected. Instead, she nodded calmly, walked toward the service station, and that alone unsettled him because powerful men are most comfortable when others react the way they expect. But what Victor didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that Aliyah wasn't just a waitress. She was a former scholarship student who had studied economics at a top university before her. Mother's illness drained every dollar she had, forcing her to pause her dreams and work nights to survive. And as she stood behind the counter, she overheard Victor bragging loudly to his guests about an acquisition he was planning, throwing around numbers carelessly, misquoting market trends, confusing valuation with revenue. And each mistake landed in Aliyah's mind like a bell ringing, clear and sharp. And when the manager nervously approached her and whispered that she didn't have to deal with that table, she surprised him by saying, softly, "No, I've got this." And she returned not with food, but with composure, placing the wine down perfectly and saying, "Sir, I apologize earlier. I just wanted to clarify your order and your numbers." And Victor laughed arrogantly, saying, "What numbers?" And that's when she calmly corrected him, explaining in clear, precise language why his deal structure was flawed, how his projected margins ignored operating costs, how a smarter competitor could exploit the weakness he had just announced to a room full of strangers. And with every sentence her voice stayed respectful. But the room began to lean in, because confidence spoken quietly is louder than arrogance shouted, and Victor's smile slowly disappeared as realization crept in that the woman he had insulted understood his empire better than he did. And if you're enjoying this moment, subscribe now, because this was only the beginning of his silence. The restaurant was no longer Victor's stage. It was Aliyah's classroom, and she never raised her voice or embarrassed him directly. She simply told the truth, and truth doesn't need permission to land. And when Victor attempted to interrupt her, one of his own investors at the table raised a hand and said, "Actually, let her finish." And that single sentence cracked something open. Because money listens to intelligence, not ego. And Aliyah continued, explaining alternative strategies, pointing out long-term risks, and even suggesting a smarter path forward. And by the time she finished, the entire table was quiet, not awkward quiet, but the kind of silence that follows realization. And Victor sat back, suddenly aware that every dismissive word he had spoken moments earlier had exposed his own ignorance. And the irony was sharp. The man who believed wealth equaled worth had just been intellectually outperformed by the woman he deemed too dumb to serve him. And when the manager returned, expecting conflict, Victor surprised everyone by standing up, clearing his throat and saying something that no one expected from a man like him. "I was wrong," and the apology wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was real. and that apology echoed louder than his insult ever had, proving that true power isn't in belittling others, but in recognizing brilliance wherever it stands. And if this turning point hit you, remember to like and subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be shared. Victor didn't just apologize, he asked questions, genuine ones about where Aaliyah learned what she knew, about her background, her studies, her ideas, and when she told him the truth, not with bitterness but with honesty, something shifted again, and before the night ended, he offered her something that stunned the entire staff: a consulting opportunity, mentorship, and financial support to finish her education. But this wasn't charity, and Aaliyah made that clear, saying she would only accept if her ideas were respected and her voice mattered. And Victor agreed, not because he felt guilty, but because he finally recognized value beyond appearances. And weeks later, when news broke that Victor's company had restructured its deal based on insights from a former waitress, the story went viral, not because of scandal, but because of growth. And Aaliyah's life changed, not because someone saved her, but because she spoke when it mattered. And if you believe stories like this can change mindsets, make sure you're subscribed, because this channel tells the stories that mainstream narratives ignore. Months later, Aaliyah no longer wore a uniform, but she never forgot the night she was underestimated, and Victor never forgot it either, because humiliation taught him something success never had: that intelligence doesn't announce itself, and dignity doesn't require permission. And the restaurant where it all began became a quiet legend among staff, a reminder that every person carries a story deeper than their role, and that sometimes the most powerful move isn't anger or revenge, but excellence delivered calmly. And as Aaliyah stood on a conference stage months later presenting strategies to executives who listened intently, she smiled, not because she had proven someone wrong, but because she had proven herself right. And if this story inspired you, challenged you, or made you think twice about how you see others, then subscribe to this channel now, because the next story might change the way you see the world too.